The next section we have to cover this week is section 3.3. And the title of this in the book is Linear Equations in Two Variables. But what we're really focusing on in this section is writing linear equations. And this starts on page 161 of your book. All right, we already talked last section about slope-intercept form for lines, linear equations. That's y equals mx plus b. We really like this form because it shows us right away the slope and the y-intercept, and that makes it really easy to graph. And hence, it's named slope-intercept form. We pretty much name everything exactly as it is in math. Well, not everything, but... we also have a form called standard form. And I mentioned that briefly last notes, but we didn't talk about what it was. This form is ax plus by equals c. So there's a few things to note. The x and the y are on the same side, the left-hand side of the equation in this form. And we have a constant over on the right-hand side. That constant could be 0, but it's any number over on the right-hand side. Now, there is one catch here. A and b cannot be fractions. Why? Because it looks ugly to have fractions in our equation. I don't know if that's the real reason, but standard form is a really nice, clean-looking form, and so I'm assuming, you want it as simple as possible. And also, a cannot be negative. So if we end up with fractions or we end up with a being negative, we're going to have to just use one of our tricks to get rid of the fractions or get rid of the negative. So we don't want this number in front of x to be negative. All right, let's put this into practice and see how we write equations of lines. Last section, we learned how to take an equation and graph a line. So we're just going backwards right here. We have write an equation of the line shown. Well, the easiest form to write it in, and it doesn't give us a specific form to write it in, so we can choose, is slope-intercept. So we just need to fill in the m and the b. So remember, b stands for my y-intercept. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we're crossing the y-axis over here. It looks like we're down 1, 2, 3, so we're at -3. So my b is going to be -3. And m is my slope. So how can I find slope? Well, pick 2 points on the line and count the rise over run, because slope is rise over run. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side of my line, and I'm going to head to a point that's more right of that. So let's start down at my y-intercept, and let's count up to this other point that's marked. So we head up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm rising 5, and I'm running 1, 2, 3. So my slope is 5/3. So just plug that into our form. And so we end up with an equation for this line of y equals 5/3 x minus 3. So that's how you would write it if you're given a picture of a line. Next, they're not giving us a picture this time, they're giving us some information. It tells us to write the equation in slope-intercept form, so we're looking for y equals mx plus b. If the line has a slope of -3/5, so here they're telling us m equals -3/5, and a y-intercept of 0, 3, which means my b is going to be the y value of the intercept, or 3. So this is another very straightforward problem. All it requires is plugging in the m and the b. So y equals -3/5 x plus 3. All right, next, it gets a little bit harder. Example 3 says, write an equation of a line in slope-intercept form, so once again, y equals mx plus b, that passes through these 2 points. Well, in y equals mx plus b, we need to find our slope and our y-intercept. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to calculate my slope. So I can use that since I have 2 points. I use my formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's go ahead and plug those in. I have 6 minus a negative 2 and 3 minus 0. So that ends up being 6 plus 2 on the top is 8, and on the bottom I have a 3. Now notice that this first point I was given is the y-intercept. Now why is that? Because I know the y-intercept is always when x equals 0. So they actually gave me the b here. The y-intercept is negative 2. Okay, they won't always do that. One of these points won't always be the y-intercept. It just so happened in this problem. So now we can plug our 2 values in. We have y equals 8/3 x minus 2. And that's our slope-intercept form. All right, now I'm asked, okay, take that form and write the equation in standard form. So all this requires is doing a little rearranging. Okay. In standard form, I want my x over by my y, so I'm going to need to move this over. But I'm not allowed to have fractions, so let's just get rid of that 8/3 off the bat so that I don't have to deal with fractions when I move things either. Okay, remember our trick to get rid of fractions is since this is a divide by 3, there's a 3 in the denominator. To undo divide by 3, I'm going to multiply by 3. But I have to do it to everything in the equation to keep the equation true. So that means I'm going to multiply this entire side by 3, and I'm going to multiply the y by 3. So that makes 3y equals, don't forget to distribute your 3. It comes to the fraction first, where we're going to have 8 times 3 over 3, so it's going to divide out, which is exactly why we chose to do this, x, so we'll just be left with 8x. And then it also needs to multiply to the 2 on the the right-hand side. So that makes -6. So let's write this a little cleaner. I end up with 8x minus 6. Now I have no more fractions to deal with, so let's go ahead and move the x so that it's over by the y. And in standard form, we write the x term first, so negative 8x plus 3y, since it's a positive 3 in front of the y, equals -6. All right, one more catch. We're not allowed to have a negative in front of that x. You guys know how to get rid of a negative. You can either multiply or divide everything by -1, and that will change this negative. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply just because I don't have room to write divide here. So if I multiply the entire left-hand side and the entire right-hand side by -1, don't forget this distributes. So it has to go to the -8 and the +3. So that becomes a positive 8x. -1 times +3 is -3y. And on the right, my -6 turns into a +6. As you can see, that trick of multiplying everything by a -1 or dividing everything by a -1, all it does is switch all the signs. Now I have a nice equation here in standard form, no fractions, and no negative out in front of the x. So we're done.